So let's start. Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. And welcome to our last Analytic Tableau user group before the summer break, because in August, we are taking some holidays and a good wet rest. So today, you will have amazing speaker and said I will introduce them, but let me talk about like what is this Tableau user group. So this user group, it's a little bit unique because we are only focusing on about analytics and how to do analytics in Tableau. So we'll come across like different platform like a Tableau Desktop, Web Edit, or as data, but it's analytic all the time. And from time to time, we'll have even like the Tableau team giving us some analytic feature updates on the new products. So here it's a QR code in case you want to join and make sure to always receive our invitation. We have also a forum page dedicated for us. So you have all our last video. I put all the video in the forum and also on the splash page. And yes, it's today it's like just enjoy. And you don't have to take note. This meeting is being recorded. And you have like the possibility to ask live questions to our speaker by using the Q&A. And to speak and say, hey, where you are coming from. For instance, Charles Coleman is saying hi from Atlanta right now, using the chat. Can you go to the next slide, Sedal? So yes, our talk leader today, it's Sedal and myself. Samantha will be back with us in October. In September, we will have again like Sedal and myself too. And we do like we split because Samantha is from APAC. So yes, Sedal, my great co-speaker today, is a Tableau specialist, a Tableau feature author, and a community equity task force leader, and plus to lead this current tag, and is obviously passionate about data and how to tell a good data story. And his passion in life are like, obviously, I'm sure his family, a good wine, and talking about sports. So myself, I'm leading the center of Tableau Center of Enablement for Swiss Bank in Switzerland. I love eating pastry and Tableau, obviously. And I'm also co-leading a Data Plus Women initiative. And thank you to everyone who vote for me. Samantha is a data visualization lead in Brisbane. She's developed workbook, and she obviously, like you can see, like to viz about Nintendo. She has different visits. And I had the pleasure to meet her for the first time at the last Tableau conference in Vegas. It was a great moment because, okay, so, and now, yes, like I said before, this session is being recorded. You just have to enjoy. You will find it on Tableau YouTube channel, and we will also send you an email with the recordings, the material of our different speaker. And like I said, you have also on the Tableau forum, we have a dedicated page. I will now copy paste on the chat all the references if you want to find a previous meeting. And then I will just let Sedal introduce our wonderful speaker that we have today.
Thank you, everyone. Glad you're all here. Glad you can chat because I know these are going to be some great sessions. I want you to be able to talk amongst yourselves, but also talk to our panelists. So glad we got that worked out. We've got a great set of folks here today. We've got Jared Flores, who's going to be talking about stepping into prep, cleaning your first data set. Martin Pohlers will talk about an example of the power of visual analytics. And we've got our special event. Jim, Dehner, and Tyler will be giving us their talk on teaching Tableau, which is from the last TC. So if you're like me and you were a virtual TC participant, you get to get some of the content that was happening live at the event. So really excited about that. But first, I want to start with Jared, who's going to give his talk around prep. Jared is a Tableau featured author, Vizion Award winner, and one of the senior consultants at Analytic Vizion. which I give JLL love. I give JP Morgan love. I think Analytic Vision is another one of those hotbeds of really talented Tableau people. So I would look out for them in addition to these other organizations. Jared specifically joined Tableau in December of 2020, Tableau Public, and participates in several community initiatives like Prepping Data, which is the Tableau Prep community initiative. He creates business style dashboards and is a huge advocate for Tableau Prep. I know I follow him specifically to keep up with it because it's not a tool that I get to use often enough. And he also went under the challenge to complete 100 days of prepping data. So very skilled in this tool. He credits the Data Fan with helping him find his voice and inspired him to launch his YouTube channel, which you should all subscribe to if you haven't already. And a series he calls Put Some Prep in Your Step. So we get to see some of that today. And I'll turn it over to Jared to talk about Tableau Prep.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a fantastic introduction. Yeah, super excited to be here and talk about Tableau Prep. And the reason why I chose this specific presentation, Step into Prep, it's one that I've done a couple of times and one that I typically do when I'm teaching the tool because it really revolves around the Superstore sample flow that they give you in Tableau Prep. And I think it really shows you all the different things that the tool can do in one really simple flow. So I wanted to kind of go through that, and I know I'm going to kind of speed through it a little bit just so I can leave some time for some questions and things. But we're going to basically rebuild the sample flow. So here, let me share my screen real quick. All right. So if you've ever opened up Tableau Prep, then it comes with this sample flow here. This is just a sort of the prep version of the Superstore sample data set that comes with Tableau Desktop. And so this is just kind of demonstrating how that would be built out in Tableau Prep. But there's a couple of choices made in this design that they're really just done to showcase some of the features of prep, not necessarily best practice or the most performant way to do it. So we're going to rebuild this, taking some of those best practice and performant things in mind, and then just kind of showcasing while going through it, not only what prep can do, but also why it's important to incorporate data preparation into your workflow. Something that you read in almost every data visualization or Tableau book is to spend time with your data before visualizing it. But I know that that's something that probably most of us don't do. And it wasn't until that I spent last year going through those 100 days of prep and data that I really started to see the importance of that. It changed the way that I work. It changed how I start to think about data problems. And I find myself more and more, whenever I'm presented with problems, looking at the data set first and examining the data set first before I do anything in Tableau. And I usually identify a lot of problems there before I start doing anything. So we'll jump into it. And really what we're going to rebuild is we're going to ignore this second piece of the flow here. So we're really just going to rebuild this. And if you take a look at it, we've got orders from each of the regions. So in this case, all of our orders data, it's not in one sheet, it's in 4 separate locations, and we're going to combine it all. And then we're going to bring in, you can see around here, we're going to bring in our returns data, and that's going to create our final output. So let's start taking a look at that. And if you've never seen Tableau Prep, or have never used it or haven't used it in a long time, it's made a lot of improvements. There's a lot of new things that it can do. And it just makes it so easy to examine your data and understand it. And so let's start with the order south. So all I did here was I connected to that sample flow. So I've got my connections up here and I've got a really big screen. And so I know it causes some issues seeing, so I've got some aids here to help with that. So I'll try to zoom in where I can, but I do know that there's some areas might be a little hard to see. So up here in my corner, I've got the connections, and we'll start, because the sample flow had order south, we'll start with that. So if I click order south here, I've got one table. But if I look at the sample flow, when I click here in my input step, down here, I see that there are 4 tables. So down here, there's 4 tables. It says 2015, 16, 17, and 18. But when I clicked my input step on my flow, it's only showing me the one table. And that is because it's doing a wildcard union in the file directory. So when I pull in my connection here, wildcard unions did change in the last update, so it looks a little bit different than it used to. This step here called tables, this used to be called wildcard unions. And so we'll go to tables here, and now it says union multiple tables. And so when I click that, it's going to automatically pull up the file directory that this file is stored in. And it looks like this weird file name because it's a temp file, because it's the sample flow. But this is a really useful feature that you can use if you've got reports that dump in the same shared drive every month, every week, whatever the cadence may be. You can use this to automatically pull in that data, and you can filter it based on, these are the new additions that they added with this latest release. So now you can filter it based on the file size, when it was created, when it was modified. Originally, this file name, you were really only able to filter it by this. If you typed in this sort of pattern here, you could type in using the asterisk to say, I want it to contain south. So everything before and everything after south, I want it to contain. So they added some of those new filters there, but we just want everything in that file location. And so now you can see that it's pulling in those additional years, even though up here in my connection, I've only got the one table. So we've got 4 years of data here. And when you're working through combining data sources to create one singular data set, the one thing you really want to pay attention to and keep in mind is just the data set that you're working with. And so when I talk to folks about just data preparation, I think the biggest struggle is understanding, where do I start? Like, how do I know where to start? And what do I do? And really the first thing that you need to do is understand your data set. And so to understand your data set, you have to take a look at your columns and your rows, understanding what values you have to work with. And then you have to understand what you need your data set to look like. And then basically just once you understand what you have got and what you need it to look like, then it's just a matter of identifying everything in between that takes you from step 1 to step 2. So in this case, we want to recreate the Superstore data set. The Superstore data set has data from multiple regions. It has sales. If you've ever taken a look at the Superstore data set, it is at the product level. So there's multiple products per order. And so that's why the order ID is not a unique field. So if I take a look at this data real quick, I can take a look at some of these columns here. And let me just pick an order ID. So I've got my order ID column here. I'm going to pick one of these with 3 rows. And so I can see here, one order ID uniquely identifies an order, but it does not uniquely identify a row. If I look across these values here, the only thing that's standing out to me as a unique identifier is this product ID. And so that's how I know what I'm working with, is because my order ID is duplicated, but my product ID is unique. So my data set is at the product per order level. And this is something that's super important when understanding your data. What that really means is, what does one row of my data set mean? That is the granularity of your data. And so once you understand what one row of your data is currently, and then you understand what you need one row of your data set to be in the future, that's how you figure out those steps in between. So in this case, luckily, all of our source data is in the same format. We just need to combine it all. And so if we take a look at the sample, the first thing that they do is right here in our sample, they remove nulls from this first step after they've combined all the orders. And so again, this is just really a showcasing of a feature of prep, not necessarily something that we need to do in this case, because if we look at the order ID field, there are no null, even if I remove this filter, there are no null values. One of the nice things about prep is if there are any null values in any of your columns, it'll appear up here at the very top of your profile pane. And so that's the other thing that's useful about prep is the profile pane. Probably the most useful piece of prep, and just makes it super easy to clean and examine your data. Because if you notice up here where all of these cards are representing your columns, there's bar charts, right? So what this is doing is it's visualizing your metadata. And so you're able to actually see the distribution of your data and kind of determine, is that normal? Is this how it's supposed to look? Or especially when you're looking at string values, like what if I was looking at this data set, expecting it to be at the order ID level, expecting my order ID value to be unique in every row, but this immediately tells me based on these bars and even the little value here that pops up when I highlight over it, if it'll pop up, that this one value has four rows. So that would immediately tell me that either I've got duplication going on or this is at a different level of detail than I thought I was working with. And so this profile pane makes it super easy to do that. It also makes it super easy to just kind of double check your data types here, make sure you've got the right data type going on, and really just kind of take a lay of the land of all of your columns here. So again, in this case, because we're going to focus more on the best practice side and keeping this flow performant, we want to clean our data, but we also don't want to add unnecessary steps that are going to make the cleansing process take longer than it needs to. So we don't have any null order IDs, so we don't need to add that step here. So really, to rebuild the tables from the south, all we needed to do was do the wildcard union here in this step. Apply. There we go. So now let's move to orders from the east. And so again, we know that we're going to have to combine all of our data sets here. So one thing to keep a lookout for is the number of columns that we're working with in each of our source tables. Are they all the same type? Are they all the same name? Because when we union those, we want those to come together cleanly. So if I bring in now my orders from the east, I can look here, and again, all of these steps make it really easy to kind of preview these things quickly. So it immediately shows me up here, I've got 21 fields here. And so I can really take a look at all of my fields here, all of my names. If I go back to my other field, here, it says I've got 22 fields up here. And so I want to make sure we've got the same number of fields. And if I look down at the bottom here, there's this file paths. And so this is added anytime you do a union. If you're doing a union here at the input step, it's going to add a column called file paths, which just tells you, so if I add a clean step here to look at it, all it is over here is just these, basically the original file name. And so I could use that in my data set if I needed to. In this case, I don't need to. And so here in my input step, I'm actually going to uncheck this box down here because I don't need it. And the earlier in my flow that I remove fields that I don't need, the quicker it's going to process as things go downstream. Because I don't want to carry that field through until the end and remove it at the end, because then prep has to process it all the way through until the end when I don't need that field at all. So I removed it here. And so now we've got the same number of fields, 21 fields. If I take a quick glance at all of the data types, I can see here that sales is a string value, and we would know that sales should probably be a numerical value. And so I'm going to change that real quick. So I'm going to add a clean step here. and I see that sales has letters in it. It has USD in it. Another thing, super nifty about Prep. Prep already knows a lot of the challenges that you're going to face, at least a lot of the common challenges, and they've made it really easy to execute some of those steps. So if I click these little 3 dots up here, these more options, I'm gonna click that, and then clean. This provides me a whole list of options that are just one-click options. One of those is remove letters. And so I'm gonna click that. And then you can see, boom, it removed all of my letters here from the sales, but it's still a string type. And so I'm gonna change it here to a decimal. I didn't have to write any calculation. I removed the letters and changed the type with 2 clicks. Now, if I wanted to know, well, what is Tableau Prep doing? Like, how did it remove those letters? Over here on the left side over here, where the changes are, I can click here. And here where it removed the letters, it actually wrote a calculation. So I can click the little pencil and it will show me the calculation that it wrote. So it's just a regular expression using basically capturing any alphabetical characters, and then replacing those with a blank. So you can still reverse engineer some of these features to get a better understanding, a deeper understanding of what's actually happening in these steps. And so now that that's done, I could rename this, and we'll rename it the same thing. Fixed data type is what it's named in the sample. And so we'll rename that here. One thing though that is super important, or that I use often and that helps me often, is the documentation within each of these steps. It makes it really clear what is happening in each step, why it's happening. And if you ever have to, if you ever leave, or if you stop managing the flow and give it to somebody else, it makes it really easy for them to pick up why certain things were happening. So to add the documentation, I'll double click here. It says add a description, and it gives me 200 characters to use. So I'll say, remove the letters from the sales field and change data type to number. And then even here, I can come back up here where I unioned all of my data sets and say, let's say wildcard union, bringing in all sales data from the South region. Really clear what's going on here now. So next thing I want to do is bring in my West orders. So I click my orders, bring in the table here. And you'll notice as I bring these things in, we've got different colors going on. And this is just Prep's way of helping you keep track of where things are coming from once you start doing unions and joins and things like that. And so once I brought this in, it was green. And so when I add a step here, the step is going to be green. And I did the same thing with yellow. So again, it's just to kind of help you keep track of which branch things are coming from. So in this input, if we take a look at the fields again, so in this one, we've got 41 fields. And again, if we want to keep up with the, or make sure we're doing a clean union here, the first 2 inputs have 21 fields. So there's 20 extra fields here. If I scroll down, you can see all of these fields that have this right underscore as a prefix. And so I'm guessing what happened when this data set was put together is there was a join that happened, and all of the right table was basically a duplicate rows happening after the join. And so we don't really need those. And so I'm going to go in and uncheck all of these boxes, because again, the sooner that I can remove what I don't need, the quicker things will process down the line. And after I removed all of those rows, or all of those columns with the right prefix under them, now I can see that I've got 21 fields. Perfect. So we're matching up now. Now, when I go to this step here, and the sample, if we look back at the sample, they're doing some grouping or renaming. So we'll come back to the sample real quick. And so here, you can see that there's these state values are grouped. And if I come to the right, there is over here. So we've got full state names, and then we've also got some state abbreviations in here. And so the grouping that happened, they basically just replaced some of the abbreviations with the full state name. And if I go back and look at my first two tables from the east and from the south, it looks like we're working with full state names. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the state abbreviations here in my west table. I'm going to replace these with the full state names. And so another really nifty thing about prep, I don't have to create a calculation to do it. I can actually just double click here and replace the value. And it's going to replace the value by doing a grouping here. You can see over here on the left, it created a group, and the group basically it created a group called Arizona and put the AZ abbreviation into that group. So it's not actually replacing the value or getting rid of it. It's just you're creating a group and putting that value in it. Now, because I have to type these in though, I can also use another really cool feature called a data role to make sure that I'm not misspelling anything. And so what that means is if I come up here to my data type, down here, there's these data roles. And so if I go to geographic, I can assign the state data role. Now, it's all going to show up fine right now because abbreviations are those are valid state values. But what if I came in here and I typed in, so I know this is supposed to be California, but what if I typed in California? So now it's going to give me a little red exclamation point, and it's going to say that the value here doesn't match the data role because I assigned it a data role of state. Tableau has recognizes the correct spellings for these, and so that's telling me I misspelled it, and so I can come in here and replace it. And so I can come in here and replace all of my values with the full state names, and I'm keeping an eye out for that exclamation point to make sure I'm spelling everything correctly. So far, so good. Keep going. Perfect. There we go. So we replaced all of those state values, and I believe that was the only change needed here. And so let me click there. Perfect. And so I'll call this rename states, just like the sample. And in my description here, I'll say replace state abbreviations with the full state name. Perfect. Last thing I need to do is bring in my orders from central. And so if I look at my fields here, I've got 24 fields in this one, and I need 21. And so if I look at all of the names here, one thing that I can see that's missing is my order date and my ship date. But I do have order year, month, and day, and ship year, month, and day. And so I can use those. If we look at the sample, in the sample, what they did is they created this this calculation here. So they're taking each of those values, converting them into a string, adding the slash mark there, and then down here in the left, they're changing that to a date type. So they create a string calculation and then convert it into a date. And so again, keeping things performant, instead of doing it that way, what we'll do is we'll just use the make date function, because those field values, if I look at them, they're already integers. So we got an integer year, integer month, integer day, and the make date function requires 3 integer values. And so that will create our date column all in one go. And so I'm going to come in here and I'll create an order date. Say make date, order year, order month, and order day. And so now we've got our order date column. And so now I don't need those year, month, and day columns anymore. So another difference here between prep and desktop. In desktop, if you use a field in a calculation, you need that field in your data set because it's all kind of happening at the same time, right? In prep, if you notice, when you make changes, there's this little line that links them together. So when I remove these fields, I'm going to click remove. And so now you can see over here, there's this little kind of line that links these two steps together. And what's happening is prep is calculating the field. It's creating that order date first and then removing the fields. So if you use fields in a calculation and then downstream you no longer need those fields, it's not going to cause errors in the original calculation that you created, because in prep everything happens in the order that you tell it to happen. So that's a really nice thing to keep in mind when trying to really clean up the amount of data that you're working with, especially if you're including all of these extra columns just because you need them in calculations. This really helps to eliminate that. So we'll do the same thing with ship date. Ship date, we'll say make date, ship year, ship month, ship day, done. And there's a couple of other things that they do. But we're gonna wait a second. So there's some renaming that happens in the original one that we're gonna wait a second for. And I'll show you why here in a second, but we'll call this fixed dates, just like the sample. And we'll say, create an order and ship date from the provided fields, and then remove unnecessary fields. And so again, this document, it does seem a little tedious, but it does help us really keep track of what's going on and why it's happening. And so after we remove those fields, let me remove these 3 ship year, month, and day fields. And that brings us down to 20 fields. So what are we missing? If we take a look at our field names here, we're missing the region. So we need to go in and we need to create a region field. This one's super easy. All we need to do is create a field that's called region and input the string of central. And you can see that that's going to provide that value across all of our rows here. Perfect. Now that we've got those, we want to combine them in a union. So easy way to do that, I can drag this over here. It's going to bring up the union. And so here's my union step. And so now I can just kind of click these steps here and add them to my union. Add this to my union. For some reason, I don't know why, I'm very particular about the shape of my flows. It doesn't actually matter, but I like them to be shaped a certain way. So now we've unioned everything. So we can very clearly see all 4 of these inputs are coming into this one union step. And when I click it, it's going to immediately show me here on the left, these are fields that are not matching. And so I can see the discount is matching correctly in the blue, yellow, and green steps. But down here, I've got a field called discounts in the pink step. Same with product. I've got a product name field in the first 3, but a product field in the last one. And so there's 2 ways we can do that. I can either go back into this flow here and rename the fields there, or I could click on discount and control click on discounts, and then up here, click merge fields. Same here, and merge the fields. And so now, again, when we do a union, same with the wildcard union, this time we did a regular union, it's going to create a new column called table names. So if you do a wildcard union in the input step, it's file paths. If you union them here with a union step, it's table names. So we don't need this field. We're going to remove it. And now if I look, I can see here that my discount field was converted into a string during the union. So that means I've got some data type mismatch happening somewhere. So if I go back in my fields here, let me see. Okay, here in this step, discounts was a string because it had a value down here of none. And so I can just quickly change that into a decimal. And then if I go back up into my union, now my discount is a number. Perfect. So now I know I'm hitting the time, so I'm trying to get through this. Last thing we got to do is bring in our returns. This one's super easy too. I've got a returns table here. I'm going to bring that in. So what we've got here, we've got, let's see, row ID, order date. We've got a bunch of columns here, but we actually don't need all of them because we're just going to add this data onto our orders data, right? So we really only need the return data for orders that got returned. And so I'm going to come into my returns input, and I'm going to remove, or I'm going to uncheck all of my fields, and I'm just going to check order ID, product ID, return reason, and notes. So I need order ID and product ID to join it to my union, but then I need the return reason and the notes for that additional information I'm trying to bring in. So I don't need to bring in all of these, the name, manufacturer, subcategory, the row ID, because again, it's just going to extra stuff for prep to process that I don't need. So I'm removing it right at the input. Here, one thing that we want to do based on the sample is we want to take the notes field and create basically a return note and an approver name. And so all of the notes, it's this free text field. You can see it is the note and then a hyphen and then the name. So a note hyphen name. And so it's like that for all of the fields. And so we could click here and click automatic split, and Tableau will kind of look at the column, look at the values, and try to detect how to automatically split those. It works most of the time. I just like to use custom split because I have more control over what's happening, and I don't want the automatic split to get it wrong. Again, it works most of the time. I just prefer the custom split. So I'm going to click custom split here. I'm going to put in that hyphen character, and I'm going to tell it I want it to split all fields. And so it's going to give me everything before and after that character. So when I click split, you can see it gave me two fields, notes dash split 1, notes dash split 2. And you can even see over here, I can still take a look at that calculation to see what it's doing on the back end to make that split happen. Okay, so now that I've got those splits, I'm going to rename this one to return notes. I'm going to rename this one to approver. And I'm going to come over here to the original field and remove it. And again, I still have my fields that split from it because it processed the split first and then removed the field. And then we can see if we look over here in the approver field, we've got a bunch of very similar names with some extra characters, some slashes, some extra spaces. And so we can clean these up by using the grouping. So I'm going to click the little 3 dots here, group values. And so again, there are some common free text problems that Prep knows you're going to face and that they've made very simple for you to come in here and just do a one-click solution to clean it up. And so here, we can manually group the values, or we can group by pronunciation, common characters, or spelling. In this case, I'm going to click spelling, and that should solve our problem for us. And there we go. So now we have all of our names grouped into unique spellings, and I can come in and click the groupings too to see exactly what values it brought in there. Now you can see this plus and minus up here. And so this is the strength of the algorithm that Prep is using to create that grouping. And so if it didn't quite group it the way that you were expecting to, you could increase the strength. But then you see if I start increasing it too much, it's going to start grouping things together that don't belong together. So like in C Arnold, it's now grouped F Azad in there. And so it's too strong. It's trying to group together too much. And so I'll take it back down to where it was. So you can play around with that, especially if you're working with like survey data, things like that, where there's a lot of free text going on. This can help you clean up a lot of that pretty quickly. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've got our fields here. I'm just going to call this split notes, say split the notes field into a notes and approver field. Use grouping on the approval names or approver names. Use grouping. There we go. And so now we can join these two together. And so I'm going to drag this over to my union and drop it on join. And then here we've got some more really useful features, right? So on the left side, it's showing me what the detected join clause is. So it's joining product ID, and the color coding is there too. So it's saying product ID from this teal color to product ID from the purple color. And if I scroll down here, so teal is the union. So that is my left table. And then purple is my right table. And right now it's got inner join selected. But again, I need to join on product ID and order ID. So I can click this plus symbol to add another join clause. So add order ID to order ID. And then it shows you a summary of the join results, which is one of my favorite things, because it shows you, okay, here's how many rows from the left table that were included, and here's how many were excluded. And so I know not every order, not every product is going to have a return. Excuse me. And so I want to use a left join here because I want all of my orders plus the information from those that did have a return. So if I click left join, now you can see all of those rows are included, but it still highlights using that sort of shaded bar, right? That not all of those rows are equally matched. There's a bunch of those rows that are not matched as part of the join, but they're included because we're doing a left join. And then you can see here these 3 rows from the right table that are excluded. If I wanted to validate and figure out what's going on, why is my data not joining? I am expecting it all to join up properly. I can click these 3 rows and it will show me those exactly. So this is something that I do a lot too when I'm validating data sets or like even building out models in a tool like DBT or something. I'll validate it in prep, figure out where my mismatches are, and then I can take these AIDs and go look them up in my database and figure out why they're not joining. So we did our join here. Everything's looking good. Now in the sample flow, there's a lot of activity happening in this join step. But I do like to make sure that things are a little bit separated, that we try to make sure that we can really understand and trace what's happening in each step. So here, ideally, all that I would really do is remove any duplicate fields. So I'm going to go to my list view here, and it even still keeps that color coding. You can see the purple here, the teal here. So if I look down here at the bottom, there is these order ID-1, product ID-1. So your tables or your columns that come from the right table, if they have the same exact column name, they're going to automatically be given the -1 name. And now since we did a right join and these are technically duplicate columns now, I don't need them, so I'm going to remove them. Perfect. Last step, there's a couple of calculations that happen in here. There is a days to ship, so we would keep that the same. So we'd say days to ship would be date diff, day, order date, and ship date. Now it does a return calculation, and if we look at the sample, this return calculation is saying if this is false, then yes, otherwise no. Keeping it more efficient, we could just use a Boolean calculation, right? We could just say returned if or not is null. We'll use not is null on the return reason. So if it's not null, then it'll be true. Otherwise it'll be false. Not is null true. Yeah. Let me see if this comes out the way I want it to. I might have confused myself. Yeah, there we go. That did come out. So that will give us the Boolean equivalent, right? So if I look at false here, I've got 15,681 rows. If I look at my sample here in the null field, I've got 15,681 rows. So that matches up. It's a Boolean calculation, a little bit more performant. We can create the year of sale field. which is year of order date. Boom. And lastly, there is this exclude filter. So in the sample, there is this exclude filter going on. And you can see it's like excluding this range of values. If I click it, it's saying exclude everything between 17 and 18 that is also not null. Okay, so if I come over here, let me find my discount field. And so here, there's actually a nifty thing here, right? So typically you can see between like the string values, you've got these, each individual value displayed. If I look at the dates or the numerical values, it's more of like a range, right? Like here's the bin, a histogram, right? So the values in this bin. But if I wanted to, I could change that view. So here in more options, for numerical values, it gives me the option to change my view from summary to detail. So in detail, it actually shows me all of my individual values. And so, but what you'll notice if I click this 17, I've right-clicked it, I can exclude that value, but it's not the same exact filter that the sample file or sample is showing. The sample flow is showing it's excluding that range from 17 to 18. And so that is because they did the exclude filter from the summary view. So the summary view is a bin from 17 to 18. I can right click, exclude that. Now I've got that same filter going on. And there we go. Add my output here. I should rename and document that, but I want to be respective of time. So that is how I would go about rebuilding the Superstore sample flow and just kind of incorporate all of these different things, making it more performant, looking at my data set, trying to understand it more as I work with it and go through it. So now when I output this and go start working it with Tableau Prep, I already fully understand what it is, what I'm working with, and kind of what I can do with it. So yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Jared. This was awesome. There's been a ton of conversation, both in chat and in Q&A. Also, thank you to everyone in the chat that's been answering questions. Martin has been helpful in the Q&A. So there's plenty more for you, Jared, but lots of great conversation happening around prep. I would say maybe a couple of quick questions. Being mindful of time. One, I think is I want to make a broader question. Well, maybe it's a two-part question. One, I guess, what got you into prep specifically? And I guess, how do you compare it to, obviously, there's so many other Ultrisk, and I think Jen mentioned Power Query, and obviously there's other ways to prep data, just going in Excel and doing your functions there. What do you like most about prep as a tool versus maybe some of the others?
I think, well, so what got me into prep was basically, it was just a problem. I had a specific problem at work that at the time, prep was really the only tool to solve it. At my team at the time was segmented from like the data engineering team. So if I needed any changes to our data set, I could not actually go in and look at the source data. I really had to kind of look at all of our different data sources that were published on online and try to figure out what changes I needed. So prep allowed me to connect directly to those data sources, combine them, do what I needed to do. And then once I started getting into it and learning more about it, seeing how it had improved, I saw that there wasn't a bunch of resources out there for it other than really the prep and data challenges. And so that's why I started using it more and doing the channel and everything. What I love most about it is just the UI. I think the profile pane, that UI, the visualizing the metadata is so useful. And it's just so clean. It's really easy for me to look at. For me, it made the learning curve into data preparation and data engineering a lot easier. Ultrix, I have used Ultrix. I've been using it more, and I think I've heard a lot of people say that Ultrix is a little bit easier to learn, and I think the reason for that is that Ultrix forces you to segment all of the actions. Like prep kind of gives you the ability, if you want to do 30 changes in one step, you can. But Alteryx is like, no, if you want to do filtering, it has to happen in this step. If you want to do sorting, it has to happen in this one. So all of those things all of those steps have their own function, and it's very segmented. And so that does make it easier to kind of learn when each of these things need to take place. It makes it more visible. Yeah, I think for me, it's just prep is super easy for me to open up and connect to some data and really quickly validate it. But I think both tools have their sort of place, right? And I see in the chat, the price has been mentioned, and that's the biggest struggle I always come to when I'm recommending one or the other. It's the price.
Yeah, I would say that as well. The only reason I got a chance to use Alteryx was through school. I'm an adjunct professor and was able to use the credits for that. But yes, it's fairly expensive. I also love, a couple people brought up if you don't have a background in SAS, SQL, R, Python, like this is a great way to do it without need to, like, that steep learning curve of learning the code can be prohibitive for a lot of people.
Yeah.
One more before I go forward. Can you speak a little bit more about your YouTube channel and maybe other resources that you have for people that may be trying to get better at prep or even brand new to prep? Because I think we've got people across the spectrum here.
Yeah, so the YouTube channel, it's called Put Some Prep in Your Step. And I started with use cases, just like things that I was encountering at work, how to go through those, a couple of like more of the basic functionality of prep. So there's lots of videos on those. There is recently in the last month or so, I started doing Tableau Prep templates, which is basically taking all of the data preparation behind Sankey's, any sigmoid charts, anything that has curved lines, anything that's out of the box. And I'm working with people like the Flores twins or Tuan Huang, CJ Mays. Like we're all working together to try and figure out how do we create the prep templates behind them to make it a lot easier and more accessible to plug in your data and make it then that way they can plug into those workbooks really easily. So that is part of, there's videos on how to build those templates yourself. There are also pre-built templates that are part of my website, whattheviz.com. But yeah, so YouTube channel, Put Some Prep in Your Step, website, whattheviz.com. Always growing it, trying to figure out how we can make it more accessible. There is Sagar Kapoor, who runs VizConnect, and I just started up the Tableau Prep Academy. We're going through our first run through of it now. So far, it's been really good. We're getting a lot of feedback on things we can do to improve it. And so I'm hoping that this is something that kind of continues and we'll have, cohorts of this as we go on.
Nice. That's awesome. We'll definitely keep those in mind. If you don't mind, there are a few questions in your resources in the chat. There's lots of people requesting those. And then there are some specific questions that we didn't get to in the Q&A related to like very specific moments in your presentation. So if you have some time to stick around and get to those, that would be great as well.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jared. And with that, we are going to transition to Martin. And as usual, I went to the slide, but didn't share it with you all. Here it is. Martin is a Tableau desktop prep and server certified trainer and a head coach at the data school. I will let him talk more about the data school, but I will just say it's a very awesome opportunity for people that are trying to, if you want Tableau to be a part of your career or data visualization, the data school I think is a great resource. They also have now a US version. So if you're based in the US, I believe it's in New York. I'll let someone check me on that. But it's a really great opportunity. So I would love for Martin to talk more about it, but also you all to check it out. Martin has a passion for numbers and analytics. He has a dual business study in Nuremberg and a master's in applied statistics at Oxford. So clearly a passion for numbers. Before moving to Hamburg for his professional career, which is where he discovered Alteryx, which we just talked about a bit, and has been a consultant and trainer since 2015. In his free time, he enjoys playing tennis, bowling, skating, and discovering distant countries and cultures. With that, I will let him talk about one example of the power of visual analytics.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Wonderful. That is very, very great from you. Yeah, so as you said already, something about me. I don't need to introduce myself any further. I am really happy that I can give you a little talk today. From my background, just one little information about the Information Lab. The company I work for, we've been founded 2010 in the UK. In Germany, where I'm based, in Hamburg, in Germany, we've been founded 2014, and we specialize in data visualization overall, and we use mainly the products Tableau and Alteryx for that. We also have other products that we work with, but that's like the heart of what we've been growing with. We have multiple European countries where we have offices, and now also the data school in New York. And the German core team, we have about 25 members plus the data school. And what we do with our core team, which I was a member of for many years, we do shorter term consultancy engagement and trainings. And also from the trainings, I used to deliver a lot. The example that I'm going to give you is originating from. And what's the data school? Data School is a program that was founded in 2015 originally, and there is like about 8 people every 4 months starting in the UK. Data School has exploded because it's working so successful, so they actually don't have every 4 months starting, but every like 2.5 months now. In Germany, we start 3 times a year, and it's overall 28 months contract that the data schoolers have with us, and they get 4 months of training, which I'm responsible for in Germany as a head coach, and after that they go into 4 months placements, and in those 4 6-month placements. And in those placements, they're going to work with companies and get work experience. And that's, I think, the big difference of the data school compared to a lot of boot camps where people get the training, but they don't get work experience. Whereas with us, they do get both. And afterwards, they can find a great job around the analytics world. So now there's been over 250 people that has been through that program. And in Hamburg, we started in October 2021. New York just started in June 2022. So it's exciting times. I'm really happy to teach and to see people grow, help them with their struggles, try to bring the best out of their strengths. And so it's a great job to do, working with young and motivated people. Or actually it doesn't need to be young, it just needs to be motivated and you have a heart for data. That's basically all the requirements we have. So what about my example that I want to give you? Some of you might recognize where it's originally from throughout the presentation. At the end, I will let you know where it comes from, what was the basis for this. And I will give you some resources where you can use that for yourself. If you ever come to a situation where you come into a discussion about why would we use visual analytics, why can't we use simply a table? I got all the numbers in my table. Why would I make a chart? And so that you could maybe use that example for helping people understand the value of visual analytics. The data set that we're going to use looks like this. It is a very small data set. It contains actually just 44 rows of data and 4 columns. And let's frame a situation that we are an analyst and we have to make a decision, or we have to tell our boss a suggestion. And what is our situation? So we want to do a marketing campaign, and we want to spend quite a large amount of money on that. And we are a data-driven company, right? So we want to make a good decision on what campaign to choose. And we had four ideas of possible campaigns, possible layouts, different styles, for example. And so we decided, hey, what we should do is make some little experiments And with those experiments, we're going to record how much did we spend and how much profit did we make with it at the end. And we did that for the 4 campaigns overall. And the nice thing, what we can do with this data set is that we are actually able to look at 100% of our data. If it would allow me to copy it for whatever reason, it's not. No, I am. So we are able to look at 100% of our data at one glance. How many times do you have that in your situation when you work with data that you can see in one spreadsheet 100% of the data? And in my classes, I teach this in the fundamental trainings that we give. I always ask, so what would you tell your boss which campaign to choose? What would you do? How would you approach this? I mean, you see 100% of your data. Shouldn't you be able to make a decision right here? I never had anyone who was confident in like betting something on a decision by looking at that data. So what I usually hear is, yes, let's try to get a sum, let's try to get an average, let's aggregate that so that we can use it. And I'm like saying, hey, but you see 100% of the data. Isn't that enough, right? It's all there. It's all there. You could use it. But let's take a look. So I loaded that data into Tableau, and we're gonna work with it. So we got 4 campaigns, and we got our cost and profit over here. So I can drag them in to get the sum. And the sum for all of the 4 campaigns in cost is 99,000. The profit is almost identical, just like a little bit of a change. Okay, so by looking at the sum, we can't really make a decision. So let's go and maybe change the aggregation to an average, because that might help us in some ways. Okay, but with the average, we kind of see the same thing. The averages are almost identical. So right now we can't make a decision based on those. If I drag in sum of cost and profit again, we could think of another maybe aggregation type that could be interesting. So one measure that is used a lot in statistics, for example, to measure variance and to measure how spread data is the so-called standard deviation, which basically measures how far from the mean the data is spread out. So if I use this standard deviation, we can also see that this is also pretty much the same. So we have now a data set where it seems like all important aggregations are identical. So what we could do is basically just roll the dice, right? So hey boss, pick anyone, they're all good, they're all fine. Let's use those. So that could be, we could stop here and say that's our analytics. But what about we go one step further and go into some visual analytics? And since we have 2 measures that hopefully influence each other, so what we want to do at the end, just to recap, is we made little experiments, obviously with a smaller amount of money, because we can't have 44 big campaigns. So we made 44 small campaigns, and we want to like extrapolate from that to have one big campaign. So there should be some kind of relationship between cost and profit. And if you look at show me here overall, that there is a scatter plot as an option if you have 2 to 4 measures, so multiple measures that kind of are related to each other. So I wanna analyze my profit and my cost. And what we can see is right now we got 1 point, 1 dot, because we are summarizing across the whole data set. Okay. I can split that up by campaign, and we can still see it's now 4 data points that are at this exact same position, because that's what we just saw in our aggregations. But now we can think of the fact that we had individual experiments. So basically, this column, the detail column that we have here in our original data set that we can use. So what about we are trying to use that one? If I take this and move it into detail, let's see what's going to happen. Now I might add a trend line too. So suddenly, the data that we just saw in a table that was all just a bunch of numbers becomes like lively. It takes a shape, it gets a picture. And what we can see is that we now have 4 campaigns that look quite differently. And let's dissect them one by one to help making a decision about which one to choose. So if we look at campaign number 1, what we can see is that we have a nice positive linear trend. It goes up. So if the cost grows, we are likely also increasing our profit, which is great because remember, we stop here at 20, but at the end, we want to have a much larger cost. So ideally, if this line just goes up, 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 we also have a much larger profit. So this one looks like a quite kind of good campaign, right? So increasing cost means increasing profit. Nice. Let's look at number 2. This is not a linear relationship. This is a so-called inverse quadratic relationship, which kind of means we have a climax, a high point, and then it goes down. And for me, this is television commercials. I watch mostly like not television anymore, but if I do, in every break of commercials, the same company does the same advertisement over and over again. And for me, the more they do that, the more adverts happening, the more I don't like that product. And basically, it goes down in this direction. So if we were to choose this type of campaign with much more money over here, it would mean we would probably go into a negative profit. So campaign number 2, probably not a good one. Let's not use that. Let's take a look at campaign number 3 on the other hand. Something that we never saw or nobody ever picked out here by looking at the data is that we have a data point that could be an outlier. So this data point clearly stands out from the rest. This allows us now to ask the question whether that's a valid data point or not. I don't know at the moment. I don't know whether this has been recorded correctly, whether there was a typo, whether this was an actual measurement or not. But I'm able to ask that question, hey, is that correct? Is that really that high of a profit? And now I'm able to judge, should I keep it or not? So if we keep it, we say it's a valid data point and we should include it in our thoughts. But if we exclude it, which I'm going to do right now, we say, no, it's not a valid data point. We shouldn't focus on that anymore. And now we have number 4. And number 4 is, an example of maybe not a greatly designed experiment setting. So we use the same level of cost multiple times, always 8, and one time we used a much higher cost with 19. And now we're trying to make something out of it. Yeah. So if we remove that data point, we can actually see that the trend line is basically non-computable anymore because we have no variation in cost. It's always the same kind of cost. So with those experiments, we can't really understand something about the relationship between cost and profit. So if we really like the setting or the layout of this campaign, we will probably need to redo our experiments with a more spread in costs, or we say, okay, we just exclude it for now in our analysis. So I think we can, for now, say 2 and 4 are not working for our needs. So let's take a look at number 1 and 3 and compare them to each other. So both of them are going upwards with a linear relationship, which is good. But the third one kind of looks a bit too good to be true, right? In reality, having a relationship that's like absolutely perfect, where we really fit the data points correctly, that's kind of unlikely. We might not really trust this, but also just think about the fact that we're currently investing like 15K, but at the end, we want to invest much, much more to the right. So this looks like a very secure option because we are always right on that trend line. But thinking about the fact that we are going to extrapolate our model to the far right, that security is really not there. So is this a really good thing to do? Maybe, maybe. So it seems like that this option on the right has less variance from the trend than this one on the left. So think about, you could invest this much amount of money, 13, and only end up with this amount of profit. Whereas if you would go here in invest 13, you're very likely having this amount of profit. So you could end up a little bit worse with campaign number 1, but you could also end up much better, like this one up here. So we now could ask our manager, hey, are you rather safely oriented? Should we pick number 3, which kind of promises safe returns, or do we rather want to pick an option that seems like more optimistic, that can lead to bigger growth? Also, the line is steeper, and a steeper line means we would have a higher return on investment. So bringing this example together is basically, we started out looking at the raw amount of data that we had, and in that raw amount of data, we were able to see 100% of our data, but it still didn't talk to us. It was just sitting there. It was hard to understand. It was hard to make a suggestion with. And then we put it on a table and aggregate it, and we see all the aggregations are the same, so we can't make anything of that. But what we could also do is visualize that. And with the visualization, we are able to see the data. And seeing that data is something really, really important and helpful. And in my trainings, this is kind of the introduction to how to use scatterplot. And we then have an exercise in the trainings, and that exercise looks like this. So we have a data set, and that data set contains some data about GDP and carbon dioxide on the basis of countries. And then I ask my my participants to build that data set, to build that scatter plot. So they just use Tableau and create a scatter plot, GDP here, carbon dioxide over there. We put country on detail and color by region. And at the end, I'm asking, hey, so what do we take out from this visualization? What's the catch? And kind of the catch is that the US stands out quite far to the right here. It seems like the US is producing a lot of carbon dioxide, but it also has a very, very high GDP. And it also kind of seems like that we have a relationship here, right? So it seems like if we want to have a bigger GDP, we kind of need to produce more carbon dioxide. And what we just heard in the previous presentation from Jared was, hey, it kind of makes sense to look at your data before you start. And that's what I'm always telling before that in the training. And at that data point, I'm always asking, hey, so what actually is like the US having $367,374 billion in GDP in what time? And they're like, yeah, I don't know. I was like, yeah, did you look at the data? No. And if you actually look at the data, you would see that it contains a column for year. So we're actually not showing the data point of the country in one specific year, but we're aggregating across multiple years. And we might not even know whether some countries started their data in like 2000 and others started their data in 1960. So we're comparing apples and pears here, and we're not really sure whether this is the same message we're saying. And what we can do with this is, hey, what about we go back into our chart and use that information of the year inside of the chart. So let's go in here and use a line chart. And then we can actually take the year and put it to path so that we get lines connecting. And I think we should turn it around like this. So now we can see GDP on the x-axis, and we see the carbon dioxide on the y-axis. And we can see that the US has, from here to here, more than doubled the GDP, but the carbon dioxide basically stayed pretty much the same, or it even went lower. And we can also see that on a basis per year, China, which is this data point here, has much higher carbon dioxide emissions than the US has. But it also has the growth of that has slowed down over time. So while looking at the fully aggregated data across all of the years, we thought, hey, to have a higher GDP, we kind of must have a higher carbon dioxide. But now looking at the data on a more detailed level, we can see that this might not be true. And this is one of the cases of something called the Simpsons Paradox, which kind of says, hey, if you look at data on an aggregated level, it could tell you a different story than if you go down a little bit deeper. So I highly recommend to you using Prep, using Tableau Desktop to go further into your data, to go deeper into your data and try to understand relationships that you don't see when you just look at the aggregated data. So if we now want to go and take a look on where that example came from, it's not my example. I didn't make it up. It was made up by somebody much smarter than me, and his guy was called Francis Enscombe, and he created this called Enscombe's Quartet to help scientists at that point understand why it's important to use graphs and why it's important to look at the data. And he basically just uses quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4 and X and Y. And I think it becomes a little bit more like touchable if you turn it into a business use case and rephrase it like that as a decision. And so Enscombe's Quartet is the basis for this, and it's not stopping there, because now actually there's the Datasaurus dozen, where the two people took that same concept of having data that has the same average and the same sums and the same standard deviation even further, and they used a lot of different extra shapes. So all of these basically have exactly the same kind of summary statistics, but if we look at them, they look very, very different. And it's called Datasaurus doesn't because also this guy has the same kind of summary statistics. And if you want to, you can just get this data here from a Google Doc. So he has the point ID, which I call experiment. He has the data set, and at the far bottom, the Enscombe's number come. So Enscombe 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the one that I just showed. So I'm going to put those 3 links inside of the chat so that you have a chance to rebuild this if you want to. And I hope it helped you a little bit seeing the value of data visualization, and maybe you can use it at some point for a discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. Really awesome chat. Lots of interesting conversations here. Would be curious, we're having a little bit of a conversation around advertising, because that was a point you brought up. And would love, any thoughts you have had on showing the value of some of those things, because I would imagine that's a lot of what you're talking about with this overtime kind of diminishing returns point. I guess, how have you, maybe if I expand it a little bit, how do you best kind of tell end users, readers, people that are your audience, how do you use the visuals to kind of show them that what they thought were true, really isn't the case anymore?
Yeah, it's just a lot of times you can't really make a prognosis on that. So you kind of like I feel like you're kind of detective. So you look into the data and try to find patterns. And so I had customer meetings where it's like one data point just popping up here, and then like I'm like, what's happening there? Oh yeah, yeah. On that day, the factory went down because of some electricity, whatever. So the people that are business users, they actually know what's happening, but then sometimes there are data points that people can't explain.
Sure.
And then it becomes really interesting because then you're like, okay, there's something happened that we didn't know about. Okay, so what happened? So this, I think having the conversation started is the main point, and then trying to combine the business knowledge that people have working there with the data and see if the gut feeling they have somewhere deviates from the data, and then you need to go and talk a little bit more about it.
That's a great point. Where their beliefs deviate from what the data is actually saying. I think that's a really important thing for everybody. I mean, not just in visual analytics, but any analytics. Being able to help people contextualize what they think are true. I'm in DC, so polling and political polling is a huge part of the work that we do, and that's a really important um, thing to remember when we're thinking about that as well. Um, One last one, obviously you're at the data school, but are there other ways that people can get better at kind of connecting those things, the data and the visuals? Because I mean, that's obviously something we're all trying to get better at as Tableau users, developers, creators. How do you, if you're somewhere in the middle, say, what are some suggestions for getting better at this idea?
Don't be afraid of trying out. So Tableau Desktop has that great undo button. So just put stuff together and take a look at it and see whether something jumps out. And especially Tableau Prep, I love for the possibility to explore the data very easy and very visually. So Tableau Prep is great to explore the data column by column wise. So you can get an overview if something stands out there, if there's nulls that shouldn't be there, and so on. And then if you know that, you can go into Tableau Desktop and put together like multiple columns, and then try to use different charts. So use a scatter plot, use a bullet chart, use a um, um, box plot, for example, to see the distribution. So use different chart types. Just go through Show Me with a couple of different measures that are interesting for you, and see whether something is interesting, and then pick up on that. So I think the difference between analytics and reporting is that reporting answers known questions in a known form, whereas analytics is at the beginning not knowing the question we're going to ask in a couple of minutes and definitely not knowing the answers from that. So being like open and trying to dive into your data at least a little bit. You got a report to give, you got something to show, I know, but take some time to dive into the data and always spend some time to understand something about it, because otherwise, you're just gonna, like, for example, people come to us and say, "Hey, we have this Excel report and we want to bring it into Tableau." And I'm saying, like, yeah, but is it just copy pasting? Is that the right thing to do? Because then we just change the tool, but we don't change the knowledge about it. So, hey, what do you want to answer? What are the actions you want to take based on that data? What decisions should be made? And then based on that, what data do we need to support those decisions? And then go from there.
Love it. Very quickly, because we do have to go, but I am also curious about your favorite. I'm gonna butcher this one. Deutsch beer.
My favorite
John
deutsches
asks.
my favorite deutsches beer. Um, it changes a lot. I don't have a favorite brand, but I rather have a favorite class of beer. So the class of beer people know most is Pilsner. So like Beck's and that type of stuff. That's Pilsner, and that's like bitter. I don't like it that much. So I like more lager or export. So actually, Carlsberg, which is not a German beer, but it's a lager, I like a lot.
Nice. Very cool. I'll have to look into it. And lots of people, myself included, love your explanation of reporting versus analytics. That's something I'll definitely have to go back to because I think it's a really important distinction. So thank you, Martin. Really appreciate it. And last but certainly not least, we've got a duo coming up, Tyler and Jim of the Data Visualization Podcast. We are going to hear a TC, basically a TC recording or TC encore from these two. Tyler was in the academics program curricular, I believe, at Harvard. We were talking about just before. So I think that should be highlighted here. Spent 10 years in higher education, working in adult education, web development, and analytics. Jim Dehner, I'm sure many of you are aware of from various talks on, particularly around LODs, is a co-founder of the Newbies user group and co-leads the Nashville Tug, and is also a visionary and 5-time forums ambassador. And just some fun things about them both. Tyler has a mobile app called SOW that can be found in the Google Play Store and Apple Store. And then Jim obviously has his blog, gemdehner.com, that has a ton of his presentations on it. So I would highly recommend that you look at them both. But going to leave it to them to give us a peek into their talk that they gave at TC called Teaching Tableau.
Thank you so much. Tyler, you
Thanks, everyone.
screen
Jim,
share?
if you want to talk for a second, I'm gonna get the slide deck pulled up.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, that last presentation, loved it. Absolutely loved it. I wish I had given that presentation to a couple of my clients because they get married to data without understanding what it means. And what you just showed, Martin, was just beautiful. I absolutely loved it. So, you ready to go, Tyler?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess we'll jump in just real quick. I just want to also throw a highlight to our forward-looking statement. So I am a Tableau employee, so I just want to preference that please don't use any of the information that Jim and I speak about today to make any financial decisions because it won't be that helpful, and it probably won't be good if you make the financial decisions based on our talk. But I do want to bring that up. Here's an example of our forward-looking statement and talk about that for a second. So again, welcome. Thank you guys for sticking around. Kind of a tough group to follow. Those were some amazing presentations before us. But we do want to take a second, talk about teaching Tableau and throw out some tips and some tricks to be successful in your organization. If you find yourself in a situation where you need to teach Tableau to your colleagues. So again, my name is Tyler Weldon, and I'm the Academic Curriculum Development Manager here at Tableau at Salesforce, specifically focused on our data skills 10 million campaign, which I'll highlight at the very end, but I'll pass it over to Jim for a second.
Okay, very good. Let's go to the next slide, Tyler. Okay, yes, my name is Jim Dehner, and I've met many of you out on the forum. I'm a 5-time forum ambassador, and I'm certain we've run into each other out there. I'm also a 2-time Tableau visionary, and I co-lead and co-founded with the newbie user group with Klaus Schulte, and I also co-lead the Nashville Tug. Now it's kind of important, and Martin, you can relate to this. I think I'm not a data scientist. I'm an engineer. And what Martin was talking about, I really got off on because, working with data comes kind of naturally. But I also have a degree in business management, and I spent about 30 years doing that sort of thing. I live in Nashville. I live in Nashville because of these 5 people down here. That's my son and 3 of my grandchildren who live in Nashville, and my younger son and his wife and the Queen up here live in Seattle, and yes, she does have Grandpa wrapped around her little finger. when I'm not doing Tableau stuff, I do have an interest in triathlon. I think I still get to call myself a triathlete. I'm a 3-time Ironman finisher, even though I haven't raced in quite a while. Tyler, back to you.
Perfect. And just to double check, everyone, we see the slide and not the presenter view, right? Just double checking on that. We're good to go.
Yep.
Super
We're good.
Perfect. Always. It's the one thing about Zoom, it never tells you exactly which slide you're showing there. So again, a little bit about me, come from 10 years of experience in higher education. That's where I came from before joining Tableau. Spent my last 5 years in instructional technology. We're working with faculty members on all things tech in the classroom. And then also with that, started developing tons of Tableau dashboards to sort of tell our story during those COVID times about our impact and what e-learning was doing in the world of education. Again, I come from, I'm talking to you today from Birmingham, Alabama. So all 3 of my degrees are from Auburn University, which is in Alabama. I actually came from hard science. That's where my background comes from. So a lot of statistical experience, but in hard science and hard research is where I came from. And then did a career shift when I got after my first job, because I never left adult education. So wrapped up a PhD about 1.5 years ago in adult education. And that's really where I've been ever since. Things that interest me and just, a little bit about me. So that's Auburn's mascot right there. So again, you can see we're pretty big and pretty big family in that realm. And so just love spending time with family. Love fly fishing. That's sort of my passion. And then right now it's all things Tableau maps. That's what, if I ever find myself in a building, when I build Tableau dashboards, I figure out how I can get a map on that dashboard, because it's something that I've become obsessed with. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. So Jim, I'm gonna pass it back to you. Let's maybe kind of just introduce where we are in the current status of teaching Tableau.
Okay, very good. I don't have to tell you, in the last 2.5 years, the world changed, and it changed at home. It changed for each and every one of us. I know many of you have gone back to the workplace now, and you're going into the office, but I also know that some of you aren't going into the office, and work at home or working from your own office is going to be the norm going into the future. But it's changed everything that we've done, and it's put a huge demand on our personal time. Tyler? Okay. But it's also really changed the way we teach and the way we learn. The traditional model of a teacher in front of a room on a whiteboard or a blackboard speaking to a classroom probably it's not the norm now, and it's probably not going to return to the norm. The world has evolved to a new norm, and that's the virtual classroom. And a lot of what we're doing even here today involves speaking to large groups of people through a virtual medium. Or there's also online personal instruction or small group discussions, but it's all built around the virtual classroom and speaking across a virtual medium. Tyler?
Sorry about that, guys. Turned on my mute. Yes, I think that's a really good point that we have a new norm in the way we have to present and teach our audience. And so one thing that's super important as you begin thinking about who your audience is you need to know, what are a traditional learner, especially an adult learner, right? And you can kind of define that the adult learner is post K-12, right? Collegiate, postgraduate, right? And so who are they? They're self-directed learners, right? They have a direction that they want to go, and they're going to self-direct the type of learning they want to take. They're going to bring in a large number of experiences. So we think about that as we're looking at the type of learner that we're talking to. We have to know they're bringing in past experiences that we can build upon. They have a readiness to learn, and they want to experience a need to know. I think I always define people to be kind of blunt, to say like, hey, in most cases, they're at A and they need to get to C, and you're B and you're in the middle. So they need to go through your training to get to where they're trying to go, right? So they have a readiness to learn. And many of them have a task-centered approach, right? They come to the learning with a specific task they want to learn versus just maybe not wanting to learn everything about it. They're really looking for those little bitty pieces to kind of get them to where they're trying to go. And majority of them are internally motivated. There's something internally motivating them to get through this type of learning. And that's sort of what we know about who the adult learner is. Now, taking that and kind of looking at who our Tableau learners are, we can kind of break them down into a couple of different categories. So there's going to be those technical focused users. And when we say that, we mean our system admins, our server admins, may or may not always be using Tableau, but they have that foundational knowledge of database structures, server administration, that they have a foundational knowledge that we can build upon, right? And then there's going to be some that are just Tableau specific users. So these are the ones that are in Tableau every single day, but they're, depending on where they are, they may have a different level of knowledge. So they may be a newbie, they may be an intermediate, they may be advanced that are looking for, those higher level dashboard designs. But no matter what, we know that they probably all have some expertise outside of Tableau. And it can range from anything. And so those are important things to know. So as we're developing our trainings, we can build upon those. So Jim, knowing what we kind of know about adult learners, why don't you jump in and tell us what your experience are teaching those specific Tableau learners?
Okay, well, let's start first by talking who we're teaching. Who are these learners? And like Tyler said, we like to break them into 3 groups. We talk about newbies, we talk about intermediates, and we talked about advanced Tableau users. When we think about newbies, they're very well-educated people. I mean, they come with a wealth of experience and a broad background, and they're learning Tableau for some job-related purpose. Either they're entering a new job, or they're looking for a promotion, or maybe they're thinking of changing roles or changing, making a change in their career, and Tableau fits into that. Well, with that group of people, we want to work on fundamentals to build a very sound foundation upon which they can build their Tableau knowledge and their skills. Now, when we go to the next group, okay, the Tableau intermediate users, they're people who have developed a level of foundational skills. They might use Tableau every day, and they're at the point where they want to expand their skills. There might be something new that's been introduced to Tableau, or it's something new to them, something that they haven't learned before. And with this group of people, we want to look at some very specific topic-based how-to instructions to show them how to use a new feature to them, and also give them some use cases where it's most applicable and where they can use it. And now our last group of people are the advanced users. And these are business-based users who are very experienced with Tableau, probably much more experienced than I would be, for example, but they're very experienced, and they've run into a business problem where they just can't get Tableau to work and solve their problem. Something in the functions that they're using and something the way they're going at Tableau doesn't produce the result that they want. And for these users, we'll get some very specific use case examples to show them not only what to do, but how to do it. Tyler, let's get back and talk about our users a little more.
Perfect. Yeah, so I think that was a great explanation from Jim about who our specific learners are in the Tableau realm, right? So if we know that now, and we think about, okay, as we're developing our content to teach these learners, what's important, right? So the number one thing that I always wanted to stress is avoiding the extraneous overload, right? It's so easy to put everything we can possibly think about on a slide, right? And trying to get it all out there. Well, we know that, our minds can't process everything, and there's actually very minimal time that we have to process something in our short-term memory and kind of commit it to long-term. So as we overload these slides, we're going to produce an extraneous load, and then we're going to have what they call a cognitive load dump, and everything's just going to dump out of their brain, and we're not going to be able to learn anything. And so it's really important to break that down and only pick and choose this, like what we think is the most important and throw that into our content, right? Because what that does, it develops what they call essential processing. So as the learner is absorbing this content, they're going to pull the content off the page and they're going to start stacking it in their brain, right? And they're going to start connecting it and stacking it up, and they're going to, processing what they're seeing. And, when they do that, it then leads to what they call the generative process. So then they can start taking what they've stacked up and start connecting it to long-term memory. And that's where, our ultimate goal is, where we're trying to get to, is take something, give it to them, and then let them, bring it back into their long-term memory. And so that's what, that's how you can do that, right? So that, again, that generative processing, it allows learners to connect what they're being taught and how it fits into their own environment, which is super important. And so those are kind of the way you want to approach that learning, is, not overload them with content. Make sure that it's simple enough and complex that they can, begin to take it off the page and then connect it to their day-to-day information. Because that's the ultimate goal, is what we want them to do, is be able to connect it with what they already are doing, or already know. So Jim, taking this, what we know about the science and what it says about the science of learning, how do you approach that in your trainings?
Okay, well, we're going to take a look at those three groups again. And first, let's take a look at the newbies. And ideally, what we would like to do is, a face-to-face learning experience. We'd like to go in the classroom and we'd like to work with them face-to-face. But we know that's not going to be the case anymore. So we settle for a quasi or a virtual-based proxy for face-to-face. Whether it's through what we're doing here today with the analytics group, or Klaus and I do the newbie user group, where we're able to work directly with a relatively large group of people who have the same interest. And we can either do it through the user group, or we can do it through a series like the series that I created, Zero to Zen, where we can look at specific topics to take them from where they are to where they're going. But the real important part, and Tyler hit on this, is within each session, only talk about one concept. We don't want to overload them with everything that we know, because they'll walk away learning nothing. Tyler, the next one. Start with something that they know. Build upon prior knowledge. And one thing Klaus and I did with the first session we did in the newbie user group, we were talking about data connections. When we took the user right back to an Excel spreadsheet, because they know Excel spreadsheets, and we told them that creating a connection creating a join in Tableau was just like doing a VLOOKUP, and creating a union in Tableau was similar to doing a pen statement. And from there, we could take them down and start talking about relationships and blended data sources. Second thing is, keep it simple. Teach when we're teaching concepts, focus on the concept. Don't focus on the detail. I teach a session where we talk about the order of operation, and the order of operation is a very complex topic. I know Annabelle teaches a session on it also, but the order of operation is like 10 steps. Well, I break it down into 3 steps, and I talk to users about the 2 steps that are at the workbook level, and the 3 steps that create the structure for a data step, data table, and then the last 5 steps are nothing more than throwing data into that data table and then working with the data in that data table. Once we've got those concepts down, we can then build upon them. Now let's go to the intermediate level. Now, the intermediate level, we're going to talk specifically about how to do a new topic for them, and it's going to be topic based. I like to do this with blog articles, but I also do a lot of presentations to TUG groups or to other groups, even like this one. And we start out specifically explaining what the function is and how it works. What are you going to learn in this function? Where would you use it, and how would you use it? And then we go on to start talking about the detail. We talk about the syntax. We talk about what each one of the arguments in the statement does and how you go about using it. Then at that point, we'll go to the next one. At that point, we can start using examples, and always start with the most simple example. Start with something that's very easy to understand and then incrementally build upon that. Users at that point can decide, oh, they've seen enough, they know enough, they don't need to see anymore. They can tune out at that point, or they can continue on until they get to where they want. Now, a real important point, and we always use it, is create a memorable image that they can relate to. People don't remember what you say. Sorry, as dynamic as Tyler is, they're not going to remember so much what we say, but they're going to remember an image. They're going to remember something about it. Give them an image that they can link onto and a way that they can get back to it so that they know when they're talking table calculations, oh, we're talking about scope and direction, but something that they can relate to, and then how to get to the detailed information. Now, in contrast, when we're talking to our most advanced users, okay, they've got a very specific problem. And it's a problem that they weren't able to figure out. And it's not just a formula. It's not, oh, what's the formula for the to-date problem or getting down into data? Well, there isn't a formula. I always start by, first of all, illustrating what they were trying to do and then explaining why it doesn't work. Show them, I know the route you were going down and we know why it's not going to work. And then we take the next step and develop the actual solution to show them what's needed to get to the answer that they want. And the next one, Tyler. And then as much as each business user is certain that their problem is unique and no one else has the same problem, you find that the same type of base cause often leads to other business issues that have the same solution. So I try to extend that to other business use cases so that one can use the material over and over again, but it also helps them relate to what the underlying cause to all these problems are. Now, once in a while, you're going to get a user who comes in and they are certain that they know what the solution to the problem is. And you know by looking at it that the solution to the problem is well above their current level of capability. An example might be they're certain they want to draw normal distribution curves. Now, there are a few people, and there are probably a lot on this call because you guys are really analytic types, a lot on this call, or maybe they're scientists who really need to know how to draw a normal distribution curve. And we can show them how to draw a normal distribution curve, and it's a pretty advanced form of analysis. But very often, the first thing I'll do is try to steer them to something that's a little less difficult, something like maybe using a histogram as opposed to a normal distribution curve, and see if that'll solve their problem first. Tyler, back to you.
Thanks, Jim. I think those are some great points that you brought up about, how we actually can develop training and speak to those specific audiences. So to kind of wrap it up, what's our ultimate goal when we're developing a training and doing it and training and teaching Tableau, right? We want to help the learner. And so when we do that, we want to simplify that learning. We want to chunk that material up, right? And so it's smaller portions. We know, the science tells us that videos, if you're doing training videos, no longer than 2 or 3 minutes, right? You got to make that content a lot smaller and give them opportunities to kind of piece it together themselves. We know of all the, I'm sitting right here and looking at 75 different distractions that are sitting all around me right now. And we know that, we live in a distracted world these days. And again, practice scaffolding, right? Build upon that content as you're developing your workshop. Start small and build upon that, right? Because again, we know that as adults, they learn on prior knowledge. So we give them that prior knowledge and we can begin to stack on top of that. And remember, help their brain connect to the content, right? So they're going to bring that prior knowledge to the learning. And so it's our goal to kind of know that audience and connect that, like Jim said, we look back and say, oh, if you're trying to understand joins, then, hey, are you familiar with Excel? Well, that's a VLOOKUP, right? It's connecting that. Okay, I already understand VLOOKUP, and now this is how it is in Tableau. So it's, again, connecting that content that we're teaching them to their long-term memory. And ultimately, right, what we're looking for is to strengthen their muscle memory, right? So as we give somebody content and they develop that and they connect it to their long-term, what we're eventually looking for is that they can recall that information 6 months, 12 months down the road, right? That's what we're ultimately looking for, is to give them an experience. All right. So if I ever had to define, I love this definition of what teaching is, right? Teaching is learning through an experience, right? It's to gain knowledge through some type of experience, right? And as a teacher, you're providing that experience. And so our ultimate goal is to provide an experience for these students that they now have a new skill that they can recall at a later opportunity, because that's what we want. We want them to give them the skills that 6 months, 12 months down the road, they're presented with a problem and they know how to either do it off the top of their head, or they know exactly where to go to refresh their memory to do that skill. And that's what we're ultimately looking for. And so, Jim, thinking about this, where the ultimate goal is do our best to help the learner. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. A couple of key points. One thing we learned early on in the virtual world is there's about a 25 or 30-minute window that's reasonable for a length of a presentation. When we start going beyond that 25 or 30-minute window, believe that your user, the member out there, is beginning to drift off and they're losing their focus. But you're beginning to wear down, and your presentation is beginning to wear on you personally. Okay, so focus on that 25 to 30-minute window with one topic in mind. Also layer that information across multiple platforms. The user today is going to go out and find you on the platform that they're used to using when they want that information. And it may not be when you're presenting it. Everything that I do, I write for my blog, and I write a topic a month for my blog, and I add it to the blog. I'll also present that live on, and they mentioned it before, VizConnect. I'm the data doctor at VizConnect, and we do a recording each month on the topic that I've added to my blog. And then I also have the workbook that's downloadable on my Tableau public site. So the user can go out to any one of those 3 sites and download that information. In addition to that, we talked before about starting from a common base, something that the user is comfortable with and something that they recognize. We talked about using an Excel worksheet, but sometimes that's not practical. Whenever I teach LOD expressions, I go back and I go to a common shape and use common language. When I teach LOD expressions, I talk to the user about their data being like a pyramid, and the data that they input is that lowest level of the pyramid. And every fixed LOD expression puts a layer in that pyramid, and they can decide where they want that layer in the overall structure, and then they can come back and use it wherever they want. But the idea is that they keep this idea of the pyramid in their mind, and where an LOD expression fits into that. Table calculations, 2 main concepts on table calculations are scope and direction. And if we can cement that with a visual image that talks about scope being how much of the table is used at one time, and direction being either across or down, now they've got something that they can build upon. Let's go to the next one. And be consistent. I talked before how we talk about 3 levels of learning. When I teach order of operations to newbies, we're building a fundamental concept of the order of operations, and I talked about the 3 groups that I break those 10 steps into. But then whenever I have a specific how-to topic that I'm talking to, and I have to reference the order of operation, I go right back and pick up that same image, so the user can see where it's used, whether it's the 6 types of filters that are applied, where they're applied in the order of operation, and how that affects the overall calculation they're dealing with. And always be consistent in language. It's very difficult, particularly for new users or people just learning a new topic. If we keep changing the terminology every time we present something, it's difficult for them to stay with us. Tyler, I think I got one more here. Okay, and then the last thing is be available. Users today, and your life is stressed, and you've got a home life you're dealing with, and a professional life you're dealing with, and a family life, and everything else. You're lucky to have you're lucky to have me time for yourself. And very often that me time comes not at the hours that I would like people to try to contact me. So you have to be available across a variety of platforms. We talked about my blog, also at user group meetings. Anytime that a person has a question, they can come out to the forum and somebody's going to answer that question, or they can go out to YouTube and see some of the presentations we put out on the Data Doctor. But set time and a place to learning probably aren't in the future anymore. Certainly aren't in the future for me. Tyler, there's an exciting initiative going on right now with Salesforce.
Yeah, and so I think Jim has made so many great points, and kind of just how we, I think the end goal is understanding our learner, right, and knowing the key steps to kind of present that content without overloading them, right? And so one thing kind of at the end that I just wanted to highlight is our mission for Data Skills 10 million. So as if you haven't seen already, so Tableau and Salesforce have made a pledge that we're going to train 10 million people in data in the next 5 years. And that starts with everyone on this call, right? So, if you're on this call and you're in a situation where you need to upskill your team or provide additional data skills to other people in your organization, then we're here to help. And so one thing I'll post in the chat in a second is our Trailhead. And so we just launched a new Trailhead on data literacy that's free for anyone that wants to take it. And so it's a great way to help, if you need it or somebody else in your team needs, just a refresh on some of those foundational skills when it comes to data skills. Take a look at that. And again, also check out our hashtag pledge for data as we all are embarking on our journey now to our data skills 10 million. And so I just want to thank everyone for kind of sticking around with us, and to Annabelle and the rest of the analytics group to giving us a time to kind of share our passion on teaching Tableau.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, really, really appreciate it. Lots of thank yous also in the chat. I think a lot of people got a lot out of this. Maybe I know we're running up on time a little bit, so maybe just one quick question that we got. Do you have any suggestions on learning how to teach, mentor, demo in general, maybe outside of just Tableau, an audience of colleagues and clients? So learning how to teach these sorts of things.
Okay. Tyler, do you want to weigh in on that, or do you want me to start first? And yeah, we had a very similar question come up when we did this live in TC. And one of the issues you're pointing at is that when you get a group of people together, they're all at different levels. And part of what if you can control with your colleagues, if you can control the environment, and you can break that up into groups who are at different levels, then you can start putting in, you can start using what we were talking about. You can start talking about fundamentals with the newbies, and you can start talking about how-to examples with people who are more advanced or the most advanced business users. It's very difficult, and I think we've all been in that type of room before in a user group meeting where people are talking about something that you can't relate to at all. It's just so far beyond what your current skill level that you just tune out. So the first step I would say is try to segregate people into different groups, or at least segregate your presentations into different parts. Okay, Tyler?
Yeah, I think so as well. And I was trying to find the book right now, and it's not at my fingertips where I was going to highlight something. But I can send that out. I can send you guys a link. There's a great textbook that I love. That's just a good book on the different kind of teaching principles. But I think, if you think about how to, it's really just, you can find some books out there, but really, there's a lot out there on just adult learning principles 101. I think that's where I would start, because that's really where we're the type of audience that we're going to be, mainly speaking to. And again, it's just really finding content out there that talks about understanding our learner, because that's, really where we're coming from. And really, like I said, taking that slide, one of those first slides that we showed was just breaking it down to understand that they're going to come from prior knowledge. That's what they're bringing, prior knowledge, and they're bringing an internal motivation. And so that's really, going from there and saying like, okay, well then how can I, build towards that? I think Jim's got one too.
Yeah, Amy, I just saw what you wrote in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me or to Tyler, and I'd like to talk to you about this, because you're talking not only about different levels, but you're talking about different styles. And yes, you do have to recognize that some people are more hands-on.
Yep.
Okay. One thing that Klaus and I learned just recently with the newbie group is we've done 4 sessions on the newbie group, and we had some users come back to us, ask for homework. And I got to tell you, you see the smile. Yeah, it's been a long time, right? We had users come back and ask for homework, and it's an example of a different style where somebody needed to do hands-on work as opposed to hearing a presentation. So yes, you need to allow for that, but feel free to contact me directly. And I know Annabelle has put up my blog, and if you go out to my blog, all my links are out there, so you can just contact me directly. And I'd love to talk to you about that.
So the last one, so there's a book out there called E-Learning and the Science of Instruction. And I think that's really, if you really want to get into like specific skills on instruction, start there. I'll throw the link right now, the Amazon link in the chat. That's one of my favorite books. And it really it's not too scientific, but it just breaks down how our brain works, right? And then the different styles that we should be approaching. Because that's like Jim said, there's going to be that, and sometimes we want to do a blog where you just want to write all the content, right? But we know that sometimes that may not be the best bet, because not everyone learns well from reading. They want, we know that learners read absorb content through their eyes and their ears. And so it's how do we, take that science and make our content so they can come both auditorial and visually. So we can geek out on that a lot, but I'll save that for another time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for sharing those links, and definitely, if you don't mind sending that to Annabelle as well, we can put them in some of the post event email stuff. Thank you, everybody. I think a couple of quick things for those who have hung on. Appreciate everyone who's still around. If you all have or you're interested in ambassadorships and all that stuff, they actually extended their the nominations until I believe that's today. So you've got a few more hours if you're interested in either nominating yourself or nominating someone else for ambassador. There is the Tableau user group leader ambassadorship. You don't have to vote for me, but it is an option.
So, Sadell, just real quick, these are nominations. You're not really voting, but one of the reasons they extended the window was because we're looking for more student ambassadors. We're looking for, and you think college level students, and we're looking for more student ambassadors. So if you are a student and you'd like to be an ambassador, nominate yourself. If you know of a student who would make a good ambassador, please nominate them. And I assume that they can get there through the QR link that's on the screen.
So please listen to Jim, but also vote for Sedal. He's doing an amazing job in this talk.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Annabelle. Speaking of nominations, if you have someone, if you're interested in presenting, please use this QR code. We would love to bring you on for an event, but also you can use it for other people you like to see. If there are other individuals you would love to see presentations from, other TC events that you wish could be redone or you didn't get to see, you can use this form to let us know, and we will definitely add it to a future session. As we mentioned, we're going on summer holiday. This is my first summer holiday because I'm in the US and we don't get those. But we will be back in September. You can go to our user group page. Obviously, you guys will get our emails, so you'll know when we're coming back. But that's going to be at the end of September, around this time again. And we look forward to that. It's going to be a great session. There's going to be amazing speakers. It will be focused on some TC presentations. So a lot of really cool presentations that we saw at TC you'll get to see here, just like the one from Jim and Tyler. I think that's all I had. Thank you all. Yes, thank you all for coming. And we look forward to seeing you. Have a great summer, and we will see you back in the fall.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.